There's a lot of confusion among church members about how Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon. This has even led to a faith crisis for some. This subject is too big to cover in one video, so I'm going to break it up. In this first part, I'm going to discuss why this issue matters, and I'm going to give you some tools to help sift through the mists of darkness surrounding this issue. Some members say, it doesn't matter how Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon. All that matters is that he did. I don't care if he looked through a toilet paper roll to translate. It won't change my testimony. While I appreciate the intention behind this statement, it dismisses the real questions that members find themselves facing when they are told about a version of the translation process that makes Joseph Smith appear to be a liar. This is a tool of the adversary used to destroy testimony. If he can destroy the credibility of Joseph Smith, he has knocked down one of the main pillars of the 3 points of the triangle of testimony. These 3 points are: Joseph Smith is a prophet of God, the Book of Mormon is the Word of God, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is God's true church. If any one of them is true, the other 2 must also be true. But if you disprove any one of these truths, you disprove the other 2. Destroying the credibility of Joseph Smith also leads to destroying the credibility of the church, because it makes people believe the church has been lying to them and suppressing the true story. Joseph Smith adamantly and repeatedly stated that he translated the Book of Mormon using the Urim and Thummim, also called the interpreters or spectacles, attached to a breastplate, and refuted during his lifetime accounts that claimed he used a seerstone in a hat. He stated this at least 13 different times. The issue is not what type of seerstone Joseph used to translate. It's about credibility. If Joseph Smith did in fact use a seerstone other than the Urim and Thummim to translate, then he is lying. And if Joseph is lying about this, how can we trust him? And how can he be a prophet? This is why it matters that we understand that Joseph Smith was telling the truth about how he translated. He was a prophet of God and wasn't lying. Now I want to be clear on this. There are members and leaders who have accepted the narrative that Joseph translated with his personal seerstone in a hat that do not believe this makes Joseph a liar. I believe they have a testimony and are believing what the scholars and historians have told them, or in some cases they have chosen to believe the accounts written by untrustworthy sources. In a video made with President Nelson discussing the translation process, he says, "We have a lot of suggestions about how it was done." He talks about the use of the hat, but says he used the Urim and Thummim seerstones in the hat, which is a combination of the 2 conflicting narratives about the translation that many church historians have decided to use. Many members have not looked at the sourcing, but rather trust what the historians say is true. The problem is that all the church historians and presidents of the church before the 1970s looked at all the same exact sources and reached the conclusion that the sources stating Joseph used a single seerstone in a hat to translate were not credible, and so they were not taught. Today I want to give you 4 keys which you can use when gauging all the different sources on the translation process and whether you should believe them. I'll include a link in the description to all the sources. Key number 1. Joseph never showed the Urim and Thummim, breastplate, or plates to anyone until commanded. Joseph said he was under strict commandments from Moroni to not show the plates, the Urim and Thummim, or the breastplate to anyone unless commanded to. Anyone who claims they saw Joseph translating shouldn't be believed. Joseph said he was told that if he showed the sacred instruments to anyone, I should be destroyed. The only people he was commanded to show the plates to were the 8 witnesses. He was commanded to help choose the 3 witnesses, but it was Moroni who showed them the plates, the Urim and Thummim, the breastplate, and the other Nephite artifacts. Joseph was never given permission to show the Urim and Thummim to anyone. Any account that says they saw Joseph Smith using the Urim and Thummim would be false. Any account that has the plates being shown to anyone during the translation process or them being left uncovered would also be false. Joseph was not going to risk his own destruction by breaking this commandment by being casual about these sacred items. We also know from this key that no one actually ever observed Joseph translating, which would have necessitated them seeing the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate. All they would have been able to observe would be him dictating words from behind some kind of curtain or separator. Key number 2. Joseph never described the details of the translation process to anyone, including his closest friends and family. How do we know this? In 1838, Joseph has a meeting with trusted leaders of the church, including his brother Hiram Smith, who was one of the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon and who had handled the plates. At the meeting, it says, Brother Hiram Smith said that he thought best that the information of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon be related by Joseph himself to the elders present, that all might know for themselves. This request is full of meaning. What would they need to know for themselves about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon that had not already been said and printed in the foreword to the book itself? To me, it's clear he's talking about the translation process and how they could know for themselves how it was done, so they could refute the anti-Mormon claims being made about Joseph using a single seerstone and a hat to translate. Joseph loved and trusted Hiram, and at this meeting, he was in an environment of faithful members. This would have been a perfect time to explain how the translation worked in detail. Instead, Joseph says that it was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and that it was not expedient for him to relate these things. If Joseph is not going to tell his own brother exactly how the translation worked, why would he tell anyone else? We have no statements from any of Joseph's trusted family members, Hiram Smith, Samuel Smith, Joseph Smith Sr., or Lucy Mack Smith, about how the translation process worked, other than them repeating what Joseph told everyone else, that it was done by the power of God through the Urim and Thummim, or interpreters. If Joseph wouldn't give specific details to his own family, why would he tell strangers or reporters? Key number 3. Any descriptions of the translation process that don't match the Lord's description can be discarded as false. The Lord chose to describe the translation process in the Doctrine and Covenants in section 9, verses 7 through 9. This was greater detail than Joseph ever felt he could give. The context of this revelation is this. Oliver Cowdery wanted to try translating. God approved of the request, and Joseph likely gave Oliver some of the characters he had copied onto paper for Martin to show to the scholars. This would allow for Oliver to make the attempt without needing to see the plates or the Urim and Thummim. Oliver tries and fails. In the revelation, God explains how to translate and why Oliver failed. Behold, you have not understood. You have supposed that I would give it unto you, when you took no thought save it was to ask me. But behold, I say unto you that you must study it out in your mind. Then you must ask me if it be right. And if it is right, I will cause that your bosom shall burn within you. Therefore you shall feel that it is right. But if it be not right, you shall have no such feelings. But you shall have a stupor of thought that shall cause you to forget the thing which is wrong. Therefore you cannot write that which is sacred, save it be given you from me. These verses show that the process required studying in your mind, asking God if what you have decided is right, and then paying attention to how you feel afterwards. The translation would not just be given without effort. Joseph also explained elsewhere that translating required faith. Any accounts that describe the translation as something where no study or prayer over each part is required, or where words are simply given with no effort made, can be discarded as false, since they clearly contradict how God describes the process. Key number 4. Only those who assisted as a scribe with the translation process would have first-hand knowledge of how scribing for Joseph worked. Everyone else is guessing, repeating something they heard, or gossiping. The only first-hand account we have comes from Oliver Cowdery, who reaffirms that the translation was done with the Urim and Thummim. We have one unpublished letter from Emma Smith written 50 years later, which mentions translation briefly, and an interview 50 years later, written down by her son with no witnesses present and published after her death with very questionable authenticity. Martin Harris didn't write any first-hand accounts, so all we have are a couple of interviews and second-hand accounts, the main one being written 57 years later and published after his death. Martin never recorded a first-hand account of Joseph using his personal seerstone to translate the Book of Mormon. The most detailed account comes from David Whitmer, who wrote it after leaving the church and becoming a bitter enemy of Joseph Smith. Whitmer admitted that he never actually witnessed the translation process, and his own accounts of the translation contradict each other. Every single other account of how the translation worked comes from someone who was not a witness. It becomes a terrible game of telephone, where almost no one has first-hand knowledge, yet they repeat what they believe to be true over and over again. In conclusion, these 4 keys should be the touchstone by which we can gauge the truth about the translation process. I've looked at all the sources. There's only one description that the reliable sources describe, and that's exactly what Joseph said, that he translated by the gift and power of God by the means of the Urim and Thummim prepared for that purpose. And now you understand. Pass it on.